Welcome to the Upper Room, where the Catholic imagination fuels intelligent discussion, and we are all here to reap the fruits. Today we welcome St. Thomas School of Law Professor Teresa Collett. Professor Collett teaches at the University of St. Thomas Law School, and she serves as the director of the Pro-Life Center at St. Thomas. She received her doctorate at the University of Oklahoma College of Law, and as a well-known advocate for the protection of human life and the family. Welcome, Professor.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
It's a real joy to have you. Lots to discuss. Some things even kind of contentious, I guess. We want to just have a good conversation, you know?
It is a contentious time in American society.
Yeah. Well, we are taking questions live, so I just want to let our viewers know at any point you can submit a question just in the comments on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're viewing. And we're just going to jump right in. So maybe, Professor Collett, if you could just tell us about your life as a Catholic, everything from where you're from to what parish you go to now.
So I'm a convert, and I was one of the hard converts in that I remember I tried to convert. I'm married to a Catholic. We've been married 42 years. And on the eve of our wedding, he had resisted changing faiths for me. I was actually a Methodist youth director at one point. And I used to say, you know, what is it about this Catholicism? Like, this is ridiculous. And I go to church every Sunday and on Wednesdays. I mean, come on, what's the deal? And he would just say, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. And so on the eve of our wedding, I called the priest that was going to marry us. And I said to Father, I said, well, our children are going to be raised in a common faith. So I guess I might as well just do this thing. And he was like, do this thing? And I said, yeah, fine, I'll convert because he's not going to convert. Let's just get this done. And he said, okay. He said, good, but here's my question. If Bob were to die as you were leaving the church, where would you go for spiritual comfort? And I said, well, go to the Methodist church. Basically, what a silly question. And he said, yeah, we have enough lukewarm Catholics. Thank you. I'll see you at the rehearsal dinner. And that was sort of like the end of it.
Wow.
So he was unwilling to participate in that. And in the end, it was the right answer. So we did what many ecumenical couples do. We went to the Lutheran church. We went to the Episcopalian church. We went to, we did the church shopping, if you will. And Bob was always like, but they don't have the Eucharist, honey. And so we finally found a parish that we kind of liked. And it was an old craggy priest who was very Orthodox, but who was willing to say, I mean, he had this young couple that had no kids. And so Bob coached first grade soccer for the church. And I said, do you care if I help with the religious formation of like the kindergartners and the little ones? Because Jesus loves me is the same, right? So really, does it? And he said, I don't care at all. And so I began working in their formation for the littlest ones. Of course, this was all before we've got the great programs we've got now for formation for little ones. And then one day he came by and he said, this just doesn't make sense to me. Let me give you a book. And he literally gave me a volume of the Summa by Thomas Aquinas. And I read it and I thought, oh, this is so awesome.
Wow.
I want to be part of this. These people have been thinking about the same questions I'm thinking about for centuries. And I want the treasury of the church. I want to be a part of that. And so next thing you know, I'm, doing confirmation and joined the church and actually taught RCIA for a period of time. And so that's how I was brought into the church. And I actually think that the priest who said no was probably right. I wasn't ready.
Right.
So anyway.
Well, thanks be to God. What a joy to hear that. It takes a special person to convert by reading a volume of the Summa, I should say.
It takes a very weird person to do that, but yes.
That's fantastic. And I know, and just from, I went to St. Thomas. I'm an alumnus of St. Thomas, and I'd seen a few talks that you'd given. And really at St. Thomas, I grew in love with the Catholic intellectual tradition, and so grateful to have such awesome minds a part of this. And then also in their profession, your work as a lawyer. So we love to have you. I like telling converts that, so thanks be to God.
Thank you. And the Catholic Studies Department really is remarkable.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they
really
are terrific.
To have them. Yeah.
Shout out to all our friends at Catholic Studies.
Yes.
So I'll jump right into questions. I prepared getting some questions just from young people. And a lot of questions, I'll attribute this to Aaliyah and Kim, this question coming up here. A lot of questions surrounding Catholics and law and being a lawyer, I should say, that is American law. So of Catholic colleges and universities in the US, 20% have a law school. And similarly, of all the law schools in our country, 20% are Catholic. If Judge Barrett is confirmed, and from what I can tell, she'll be confirmed, there will be 6 Catholic Supreme Court justices. And so the question is, it seems like there's a relationship between being Catholic and law or practicing law or being a lawyer. Can you speak to that?
Sure. And I think part of it is exactly what brought me into the church, that we believe in faith and reason. And because of that, especially for lawyers, the idea that we can reason to what the rules about how a community should live together is a great treasure. And especially in these times when, reason in some parts of the academy is truly under assault. It's all subjective, it's all, and so the Catholic tradition, honestly, right? The canonical courts were the courts for centuries. And we've really thought hard and long about what justice requires and how do you craft a rule of law for diverse societies where different values are in competition. And it is a wonderful foundation for the study of law. And I had the blessing of actually having Judge Barrett in class the one year I visited as a professor at the University of Notre Dame Law School. And she, not only did she graduate in the first of her class, but she is one of the kindest, most thoughtful people. Not weak. People may sometimes see kindness as weakness. That is not what I am saying. But she is just a remarkable woman, the sort of woman that you would want as your lawyer, certainly happy to have as your judge. And frankly, I would welcome her, were she not already married, into our family as a daughter-in-law. She's just a remarkable woman.
Now, we're already Catholics on the Supreme Court, but it seems like Amy Barrett is getting a lot of attention as a Catholic right now. I wonder if you could speak to why you think that is.
Well, as Senator Feinstein said, it is true that the dogma speaks loudly within her, or dwells loudly within her. And I don't know about your listening audience, but frankly, I wanted one of those T-shirts as soon as they came out. I'm not sure I've earned it, but I want it, sort of thing. I think that contemporary culture is frightened by, at least parts of contemporary culture are frightened by people of true conviction. And I was talking about this with my students the other day in class, and I was saying, actually Judge Barrett in her article with John Garvey takes the position that, as she took in front of the Senate committee, that a Catholic judge can separate her religious faith from her legal interpretation of the law. And while I think that's true in certain types of cases, antitrust, sort of technological privacy rights, those sorts of things, where it's really simply analyzing the text of the statute. But I think in some cases, there's a more profound question. And as I was telling my students, for sincere Catholics or believers in other faith traditions, religion's not a raincoat. We don't just wear it when things are hard and rainy and stormy, and then take it off when the skies are blue. It is a profound commitment to fundamental truths.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, one of the most fundamental truths of our faith is that we are created, every one of us, in the image of God. And therefore, because every one of us is created in that image of God, equality is required and respect for the dignity of each person.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly don't think anybody would want me to abandon that if I were sitting on a court. Especially those who self-identify as, quote, liberals in the political, they would welcome this belief that because of our innate nature, the government and other people are required to recognize the innate dignity of every human being and the equality of every human being. And so I think the idea that we can just ignore these profound commitments for any judge is perhaps a little naive. And it seems to me that when those profound commitments are at issue, like they are in the abortion or the euthanasia or some of the racial justice cases, I think the reality is that our commitments shape the way we see the world, what we find credible, what we believe. And so the most we can ask of any judge or justice is to be transparent about what has influenced their decision.
Right.
And not to suppress their own humanity.
Sure. Well, yeah, to talk about that for a moment. So I think that, I think before I get into that though, I should, if people are just joining us right now, we're with Professor Teresa Collett from the St. Thomas Law School. And you can submit questions at any point, just put them in the comments here. Going back to Judge Barrett as a Catholic, and okay, there's this one side that her Catholicism is getting a lot of attention because there's a certain sort of fear of a kind of religious, what should I say, trying to control, right, an authoritarian religious, right. So that's one side. A lot of Catholics are very excited about this because there's sort of this understanding like that Roe v. Wade will be overturned, right? I wonder if you could, and of course, Amy Barrett was questioned on this throughout the hearings. What does that mean? What's the pro-life sort of stance or understanding of how court decisions could affect Roe v. Wade? What's going on, do you think, in Amy Barrett's mind, who she's known it's known that she's pro-life. We understand that she's pro-life, personally, certainly, right? So I wonder if you could speak to that. How does it work actively in law? The idea that life would be protected from conception.
Sure. So this is my fourth Zoom call of the day. And one of which was to provide a lecture on pro-life feminism to the University of Seattle. And we had 75 law students attend, most of whom had as their screen shot some sort of support for abortion rights. And so I was really excited about the opportunity to present the legal arguments as well as the moral arguments to an audience that were deeply skeptical, right, of our views. Roe versus Wade, of course, is the genesis of a national prohibition on states' ability to protect the most vulnerable among us, the unborn. And that case in 1973 has generated tremendous smoke But the reality is today, even if Roe versus Wade were overruled, at least 52%, and I just did these calculations for a editorial that I'm submitting to various places. Even if Roe versus Wade were overruled today, it would make almost zero difference in, even according to the Center for Reproductive Rights, to 52% of American women. So, for example, in Minnesota, we have a Supreme Court decision that says that the right to obtain an abortion is protected by the state constitution, not the federal constitution, but the state constitution. So even if Roe is reversed tomorrow, abortion will remain available in Minnesota in the same way as it is today. And your listeners should know that, or your viewers should know, that that includes abortion post-viability, notwithstanding that even various Planned Parenthood organizations agree that bringing the child to term is actually safer than the abortion at that stage of the pregnancy. And so, so if we overrule Roe versus Wade, and for at least half the women in the country, it's of virtually no consequence. The only people it's of consequence to are those people that live in states that actually have pro-life majorities in their legislature, which is not Minnesota. And so it matters to Texas, it matters in Oklahoma, it matters in Mississippi, it matters in Louisiana, it matters in parts of, it matters in Wisconsin, but it doesn't matter in Minnesota. So for the pro-life forces to say this is going to be a crushing victory is inaccurate. It's just as inaccurate for the pro-abortion side to say, oh, this is the end of abortion's availability in the country. It's just false. Judge Barrett, I would reasonably anticipate, will wait for a case that actually raises the question. Now, there is legislation in a number of states that would directly raise the question. And so she may not have to wait long. But then the question is, how do we deal with the argument, and this is the stare decisis argument, that was made in Planned Parenthood versus Casey by the Catholic Justice Kennedy in the plurality, that people have organized their lives around the availability of abortion should contraception fail. That's actually language from the case. And I think the answer, I think the answer is that people may have historically organized their lives that way, but with a change in precedent, it provides the opportunity for states to say, you shouldn't be relying on this. You should exercise sexual self-restraint. And if contraception is used and if it fails, we don't think that therefore means you have a right to kill the unborn child within you. And that was part of my presentation to these students in Seattle, was that I think it harms women, frankly, because we will never reform our institutions as long as it's okay to say, well, you should have the reproductive life of a male. It shouldn't be interrupted by pregnancies and childbearing. So, you obviously can't fulfill the job. And we saw some of that with Judge Barrett, right? I mean, we saw people, sadly, on both sides of the aisle saying, well, she can't possibly be a good mother to her 7 children and be a Supreme Court judge. Nobody said that about Scalia. I'm sorry. And he had 8 kids. Really? Are you serious? So I don't think we will find equal opportunity for women in society.
That's an interesting point too. The idea that often in discussions about abortion, debates about abortion, when we Catholics trying to defend the teaching of the church, but really what the church believes is a teaching of reason and natural law, the arguments against it are often what options does a woman have? What if she wants to become successful, et cetera, et cetera? These are the options you get. do you have any comment on the idea of, here we have a Supreme Court justice candidate with 7 kids, an incredible career, a mind, just an intellect that is really outstanding. I mean, this, and I should repeat, I don't know if people caught that, a student of yours. She was a student of yours. How do you think that sort of stands in the face of that argument, especially for women?
And even the New York Times has acknowledged it is proof positive and tremendous encouragement for women who stand with the church. And there are a number of us.
Yes.
Who say, the church actually has the authentic teaching about how we achieve equality. And that equality doesn't mean sameness. There is no man that's going to need a maternity leave. And we all acknowledge that. But what it does mean is that women have tremendous gifts and talents that they want to use for the common good in the public square. And if you foreclose that simply because we are mothers, there is something really wrong. And to put us to the test of, well, you have to sacrifice your capacity of childbearing to actually be CEO of Thomson Reuters, a major corporation here in town, or to be, the next senator from the state of Minnesota, or to be even the president of the United States, or in this case, a U.S. Supreme Court justice. We don't put men to that choice. And so there are a number of us who are faithful, professional faithful Catholics who are professional women, because I want to put the adjectives in the right place.
There's an understanding there that life does not impede or somehow subtract from one's ability, a woman's ability to succeed in her society. It's just, that's, I think, so noteworthy to me. It stands in the face of that. We have
our service.
Right. We have a question here from Nicole Bloom about originalism. Are you concerned, she says, are you concerned about the upsurge of originalism in federal courts? I wonder if you might just explain for viewers what this term judicial philosophy is, what is originalism, and maybe your own opinions about it in terms of a Supreme Court justice.
Sure. So originalism, as Judge Barrett noted in her testimony before the Senate, and I told my law students, if you want a great short seminar in constitutional law, ignore the political grandstanding on both sides of the aisle and just listen to her answers to legal questions, because she did a wonderful job. But originalism is the idea that when we are faced with trying to figure out what a statute means in a particular application, that we go back and we look at the understanding of those who ratified that particular constitutional provision. So, for example, police officers and other law enforcement agencies currently use infrared searches of homes or of other residential properties to see if there is anybody in the house. Is that an illegal search and seizure? That is not a question that Jefferson or Washington or Franklin or the founding fathers contemplated. Mm-hmm. But they did contemplate government agents intruding into your home in such a way that it's illegitimate and therefore unconstitutional. Originalism says when the question comes up about infrared searches or flights over your property to see that marijuana is growing in the field so they can prosecute you for drug laws, those sorts of cases, when we're trying to figure out whether the Fourth Amendment search and seizure protection actually applies, then we go back to see, well, what were the ratifiers thinking when they did this? And from that, we can extrapolate what their position is on this particular question. It's a very sensible approach, and it actually provides a restraint on justices who favor what Justice Breyer and other justices call the living Constitution or active liberty, where they say, well, the Constitution evolves and it has to be interpreted in such a way to, and my answer is, the Constitution can be changed by amendment, but because you have a political preference on this question does not mean that you get to read it in a way that contradicts what the ratifiers thought.
Right.
And that's really the fight between the two jurisprudential schools. So I am an originalist, and I am a fan of Judge Barrett's adoption of it and adherence to it.
Right.
And it doesn't mean it's always going to be a conservative outcome, because Justice Gorsuch claims, I think somewhat improbably or implausibly, but nonetheless, Justice Gorsuch claimed he was using originalism when he found that the federal sex discrimination laws included protection of sexual identity. Didn't turn out to be a conservative result there.
Right, and that brings up the point that originalists can sort of have arguments as to what it means to match how a law is applied and
the ratifier's intent.
Right.
So it's a very robust intellectual community where we're all arguing about what originalism means.
In fact, I wonder, does that relates to probably her notion of not like the notion that her faith doesn't dictate how she judges, except to say she's doing her duty to look at what the legislators write down and how it applies to particular cases. She can't dictate by fiat. It was the word that she used. She kept reiterating these in the hearings. So is that sort of a fair characterization?
Right. She talked about there is no law of Amy outside my household, and inside my household there is a law of Amy. And she used the example I've used in class all the time, that, and of course our children, like her children, being raised by a politically active law professor, are well aware. And at one point, one of them claimed they had First Amendment rights to say things that I thought were disrespectful and inappropriate. And I said, "Oh no, dear, that's only state action. I am not the state. I am your mother. I am over the state. There are no constitutional rights at my dinner table," sort of thing. So she's quite right on that. And it's an important, what I found just wonderful is that it was a great opportunity for the American public to actually begin to think about, well, what do these documents mean? And what does it mean to be involved in the political process? Because I think one of our most precious rights is the right of collective self-determination. And when the court steps in and by fiat takes away political debates, intense political debates going on, and saying, well, we're going to just read the Constitution to take it away from the people. And as Justice Kennedy said in his opinion in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and they must respect and adhere to our No, wrong. No. You are not our robed rulers. And
right, that's not the job of the judge, you might say, objectively, right?
That's right. Originalism protects against that. Does it, like I said, it doesn't dictate a particular outcome. You've got Bostick with the question about sex discrimination laws, but you have other cases. And honestly, in some ways, I probably more than Judge Barrett am closer to Justice Thomas's jurisprudence, where he also relies on natural law, which is a tradition that's often associated with Catholicism, but frankly was the dominant intellectual tradition on the court for the first 2 centuries. Right,
at the time of the framing of the Constitution. So I just want to remind everybody, you can enter questions here. I do have a question from beforehand from Desmond about packing the court. He asks, what's the Catholic perspective on the talk of packing the court? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I don't think there's a Catholic perspective on that. I think it's a pragmatic judgment that prudence should dictate the result.
Maybe explain what is packing the court. What does that mean?
Sure. In fact, yesterday I did continuing legal education for lawyers with Ilya Shapiro, who has a new book out called Supreme Disorder, and it's about the history of confirmation hearings. And so if you remember your 9th grade American history class, or whenever you took it in your high school education, FDR was a big fan of the idea that he wasn't getting the political results he wanted from the court. The court was constraining his ability to engage in certain social legislation that he had designed to get us out of a depression. So it wasn't malintent on his part. It was one political response to a crisis in the United States. But the court kept saying, no, we've got a contracts clause. We've got these other provisions of the Constitution. The government doesn't get to interfere. And so he threatened to expand the number of justices on the court because he didn't like the political result from the judicial opinions. And there's the famous saying, a switch in time saved nine, that in fact he was able, and during his entire tenure, he actually appointed 9 justices. So ultimately he replaced the court during the terms that he had. And so court packing came up early in his second term, I think. And even his own vice president fought him publicly over it. Because it's the idea that we're going to change the composition and the size of the court in order to achieve a particular political result. And if there's anything we've learned in the past 20 years, that playing brinksmanship on these sort of important constitutional structures and restructuring them is a bad idea, because there's no guarantee that the party who seeks to benefit from those changes will remain in power forever. In fact, there's a pretty certain bet that they're not going to remain in power. And I'm quite confident that, and not to be partisan, but I'm quite confident a number of Democrats who changed the confirmation for judicial appointees are regretting some of the changes they made. The problem is, it's not a game of chicken, it's more a game of who's willing to sacrifice what their political supporters want in order to ratchet it back down. And I will say, although I think at one level it is sort of a dodge, but nonetheless, as you probably know, Vice President Biden has announced he's going to put it in front of a commission. Should he be elected, he would put the question in front of a presidential commission. Now, he says it's going to be comprised of legal academics, which to me means, okay, it's going to be comprised by all liberals. So that's problematic. And he talks about it being bipartisan. But there is some merit in this idea that there are lots of other options if it really is about the court not operating effectively.
Right.
We could term limit justices. We could, if it's the confirmation process alone, we could go back to the procedure that was in the 1920s, where the appointee doesn't even appear, but we get the testimony of those who support them and the testimony of those who oppose them. Because frankly, other than a wonderful introduction to constitutional law, Judge Barrett did the right thing and followed the rule of Justice Kagan and Justice Ginsburg, and that I'm not going to answer questions that could come in front of me. So what do we really learn about future positions? And so there are a lot of different options out there.
Yeah, and I think that, that brings up another interesting question about, so if a certain party is trying to pack the court to benefit their cause or ideology or whatever.
Or rush a justice through.
Right, or rush someone through or whatever. To me, it brings up this interesting thing that I hear judges who are characterized left or right or all across. I hear a lot about how it's important that the Supreme Court remain non-political, that it's not a political entity. What does that mean? Because to those of us out in the world, I'm just like, aren't we discussing politics? This is politics. Why is there this emphasis on making certain institutions non-political? What does that mean? Why is that important?
Well, now this is something that Catholic doctrine speaks to, which is the idea that justice requires conflicts be resolved by a neutral arbiter, that in order for there to be justice served, that a party cannot be the decider in their own case, essentially. And so to the extent that what we're trying to say is that the Article 3 judges or the judicial branch in the state of Minnesota really needs to be, in some ways, Caesar's wife, above reproach, non-political, so that right now in Minnesota, for example, we have litigation pending where the Unitarian Church and a group called Gender Justice and a physician and a nurse practitioner have sued to set aside virtually all of our laws regulating abortion. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have many because we've got a state constitutional decision. We don't have a prohibition on post-viability abortion. We don't have a number of other protections, but we do have a parental involvement law. And we have a law that when there are adverse effects and certain demographic aspects, you have to report to the Department of Health. These are under attack. When we go into court, and I should note that I am co-counsel on behalf of the Minnesota Synod, trying to protect our statutes that require reporting to the health department and parental involvement and some other aspects. When we go into court, we need to be in front of someone who is neither publicly running a campaign that's pro-choice or pro-life. And so that's really what's at stake here, this idea. Now, the appointment process, as Ilya Shapiro in his book makes evident, it's always been political, always, and probably always will be. But once they put on those robes, they really are supposed to try to adopt a neutral question or a neutral posture to the questions before them. What does the statute say? What does the Constitution say? As opposed to, this is the outcome I want, and therefore I can vote for it, which is the role of a legislature.
Right. And just your view, I guess your opinion on that is that that notion is important, or
it is important.
Why not elect, judges or something like that, or that they might have term limits or something,
Well, in fact, we do elect judges at the state level, and and many other states do. And what's interesting, that people who attack the idea of elections for judges to know is historically many states shifted from judicial appointment to judicial election in response to trying to avoid the impact of the fugitive slave laws. There were many northern states that had appointed justices where the legislature and the electorate said, we are not going to adhere to that law, and we're not sending people back into slavery, so we are going to elect judges. So it was an attempt to publicly influence, right? And so it's a really interesting question. But when I talk about elected versus appointed judges, I talk about, the politics of the back room, which is intensely evident, and especially if we're talking about Justice Kavanaugh's hearings, right? I mean, you couldn't look for better evidence of it, versus the politics of the ballot box. And frankly, even though I am a lawyer and might actually be one of those people that has access to the back room, I think that's not good for political self-determination collectively. And so I think that's a really interesting question. I think it's a complex question. Again, the church doesn't speak to it directly because it's a matter of political prudence.
Right. And that brings up a great point. Maybe that sort of moves us a little bit into the election. Catholics are being told by and taught to vote your conscience is what you hear in the Catholic ethos, and many Catholics might disagree on policy, but be coming from those same first principles. I mean, you laugh because you know that so well, and I think maybe that's where I'll bring up this question about the election right now. Actually, we have a comment saying that you're showing your bias, and I just want to let everybody know that this conversation is an interview with a Catholic, someone of faith who's living out her faith. And Professor Collett, you recently wrote, I want to bring up the op-ed you wrote that was picked up by America Magazine. America Magazine did a series of op-eds, I think all by Catholics, if I'm not mistaken, on the voting, right? And I mean, the title of yours, I'll read it here, was President Trump kept his promises. That's why, as a Catholic, I want 4 more years, is the title of your article. But in the same magazine, another pro-life Catholic writer, John Carr, who you may know.
Who I like very much. And John and I have fussed about many things and marched arm in arm on others.
Right, yeah. So John Carr, who worked many years for the USCCB,
Right.
he quoted the same document that you did. I'm just reading the quote here from it. This is the USCCB's document on faithful citizenship. Decisions should take into account a candidate's commitments, character, integrity, and ability to influence a given issue. So the point being that all sorts of Catholics are coming from there. We claim we're coming from the same first principles, yet we're coming to different conclusions. I have friends who are insisting that maybe they shouldn't vote, that they shouldn't vote at all. Other friends who are saying, again, coming from these same first principles, pro-life, pro-integrity. Others saying we shouldn't vote, or we should vote third party. So my question is, what's up with that? What do you think of that? Why does it seem like we're starting from the same principles, but coming to different conclusions?
Well, I actually had a colleague say to my face that Catholic universities should have no pro-Trump faculty members. So you're touching on something that is a touch tender, because the reality is, even at the law school, I'm probably one of 2 out of 24, 25. Maybe one of those shy Trump voters is in the faculty, but so it is a very divisive issue. And people rightly respond poorly when they feel like you're accusing them of being a bad Catholic for the political judgment you make. But the church is teaching, both at the Vatican level and at the USCCB, the national level, as well as the diocesan level, is that it is a pragmatic judgment that has a specific hierarchy of values that we have to adhere to. But how we weigh those and arrive at the conclusion we do is something that is a matter, again, of a properly formed conscience. So I have many friends who take the position and actually build on my earlier comments that the reversal of Roe versus Wade is not the cure-all to abortion in the United States, and therefore they take abortion and its possible reversal out of their calculus. Now, I think that's wrong to do, but I understand their reasoning, and therefore they are moved more by questions related to their understanding of the policies on immigration, or their understanding on the policies regarding the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. And so to that extent, that's where we get this divide of prudential judgments. And I don't think that we can set essentially the death of 1 million children a year aside. Most of the faithful Catholics I know who are going to vote American Solidarity Party, who are not going to vote for either of the prominent candidates, are people who are deeply committed and agree with me that abortion is the functional equivalent of the slavery issue. And we would not say, well, I'm going to set aside the slavery issue because of concerns about other things. But their resolution is that they find President Trump to be such a flawed human being that they simply cannot endorse his leadership. And I understand that, and I agree with them. As you know, Professor Robert George at Princeton, another very prominent Catholic engaged in the public dialogue about the common good, has published an essay where he says that, Catholics in good conscience can certainly vote for candidate Carroll, who is the American Solidarity Party, or for President Trump, but any other option is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And you have bishops saying that. You have other bishops saying that because of Trump's personality flaws, that he's an unacceptable option. So
yeah, that was interesting to me. first, it was interesting to see that both you, I'm sort of, I don't mean to, I don't want to characterize me as like pitting you against John Carr because, and as you said, you're both friends, but you both use the same document and that I hadn't ever read until I read your article. So now I'm going to that document on faithful citizenship. And it's interesting to me that the bishops find it important, the character of a politician, that Catholics should be looking to the character. I think you both, I think the argument, I guess, that we all have to agree with is that we all need to be as informed as we can. I mean, you both make good cases. Robert George, I'm familiar with, I think I'm thinking of the same article that he wrote with, I forgot who it was with someone else, the idea of voting a third party. But at least all of these views are very well informed. There's thought, there's an understanding, a deep understanding of the faith. And I mean, I wonder, even prayer should be a part of our decision.
No question. And Scripture tells us that, as well as church teaching, that, pray for our leaders because so that we can live peaceful lives. And Lord knows it doesn't feel like we've done that to me for 12 years, whether we're talking about the Obama administration or we're talking about the Trump administration. I recognize you're going to get a ton of tweets or whatever chats on that point, but it feels like to me, the whole divisiveness of, requiring sports to open up to people who self-identify as a different gender, or the whole question about how we resolve the marriage issue, or the whole question about the abortion. I mean, I feel like we've not lived in peaceful times for a very long time.
Right.
So we should pray for our leaders, and we should pray for them regardless of who they are.
Right. That's that's another one of those things that there's no question. We need to be praying. Thanks be to God. And be offering our leaders and those and our lawyers and professors all to the mercy of God. This is it's He who wins in the end. We know the end of the story, I guess. So I think that should help us, give us some hope as to not get too because it is a contentious moment right now, and people are looking to maybe getting a little bit of a fight here and there online when it comes to these issues. And I think that the church always favors what's peaceful, right?
There's a wonderful exercise, and I require it of all my students in all my classes, even if it means they're repeating it. It's called the open mind exercises, and it pops right up if you Google open mind. But what it does, it's by Jonathan Haidt, who is a moral psychology professor, a chaired professor at NYU. And he wrote the book, Why Good People Disagree About Religion and Politics. And it starts out and it sort of says, we are at a point where we attribute to people who disagree with us politically, we attribute bad motives to them. And in reality, if you actually drill down and figure it out, that at least according to his research, and I think it's true, that Americans have a number of common values. We all value equality. We all value justice. We all value authority properly exercised. We all value tradition properly understood. But the big political differences come in the way we prioritize those, particularly in trying to answer a particular question. And we have to understand that so much of our response is an emotional response. He talks about our emotions being the elephant and our reason being the little rider on top trying to say, no, not into that jungle, no.
Right.
And in political discussions, and I talk with my students in class about advocacy regularly, and I say, drive my elephant, make me want to vote for you, and then give me the legal analysis that gets me there. Well, I think that's what's happening in politics, but people aren't stepping back and trying to do the analysis. They're just letting their elephants run wild. And I don't mean to use elephants because, of course, they're the symbol of one. They're letting their elephants and donkeys run wild.
Right. No, that's understood. A last question here, I think from, well, we still have a little bit of time here. If anybody wants to submit questions, please know that you can do that on our YouTube or Facebook page. I have a question from Tony who asks, what do I tell people who call me a one-issue voter? That might be in terms of abortion. I usually.
Oh, absolutely. It probably is. I get accused of that regularly. I did a Zoom interview for the Diocese of New York New York City. And that was one of the questions that the interviewer asked me. Aren't you a one-issue voter? And I said, in the pre-Civil War, I hope I would have been a one-issue voter. And so when you have the gravity of human life at stake, the most fundamental of all human rights, I don't think that's problematic to say, what other group of people would you say, well, but we get economic prosperity if we allow this, or women will have greater professional achievement if we allow. I can't imagine that there is any other group of human beings that we would make these sort of other compromises for. So to the extent it's the abortion issue, it seems to me, now you have to make that argument pretty softly, because then you get into the argument of, well, but these aren't real people. And of course, even in one of the wonderful things about the law in this area is that the Eighth Circuit, which is the controlling federal court in our state, among other states, actually had a case because one of the Dakotas required abortion providers to tell women that abortion ends the life of a separate, unique human being. And Planned Parenthood of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota challenged it in Planned Parenthood versus Rounds. And the en banc decision said they could present no evidence to show that that's a false statement, and that the only way they could actually avoid being required to say that is to show that there's any abortions that don't end the life of a separate, unique human being. And it's I quote that in many a court brief. So part of my answer is, yeah, I am. I absolutely am. The other part of my answer is, tell me why you think these other issues outweigh it. And that's my conversation with John Carr, right? Because he believes that Trump really can't effectively make a change in that area. And so there are other issues. It's not that he's a bad man or he's a wicked man or he's not a very smart man. He is a good man. He is a devout man of faith, and he's
certainly pro-life.
And he's pro-life.
Yeah.
But it's sort of those judgments about how do we actually change the country on this issue, and is it even possible?
Right. That's terrific. I think maybe as a means to sort of come to an end here, we just have a few more minutes. I think it's only fitting to bring up St. Thomas More whenever we have a conversation with a Catholic lawyer. He's a favorite saint of mine. I'm not sure if he is of yours, but I wonder what saints do you turn to in these times or throughout your life? Do you have any sort of special saints for your profession, for your life, if you have any comments on that?
Well, Catherine of Siena is one of my favorites. And of course, although I was born a Protestant, my parents are Protestant or were Protestant. I love the story of Teresa of Avila, where she's thrown from the carriage and shakes her fist and says, if this is the way you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few, Lord.
Right.
And dancing in the convent with castanets. I mean, she was such a joyful saint at such a complex time and a wonderful leader. And Catherine Siena, similarly, I mean, that's the schism of the church. And yet she came forward. Joan of Arc, of course, is one of my favorites. Thomas More is a favorite, but I tend more to Thomas Aquinas since he brought me into the church.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of Thomas Aquinas as well. So whenever I'm working on a really important brief or something, I usually start my writing by praying to all of them and any other lawyers in heaven and saying, okay, folks, I need you on my shoulder. I need you proofreading with me. Help me get this done, sort of thing. So
that's awesome. Well, I mean, just talking to you and this whole conversation, all these saints who were so vital at a certain time, God gave humanity them in these times. I have to say, I'm so glad that God gave us you at this time. And there's no doubt these times are tumultuous and we need to be holy. We need to be saints. We need to rise up and we need to turn to the saints to grow in our own holiness. I think I'll take this last question from Father Michael. I mean, we got a priest watching. We should take, speaking of holiness, we should take our priest's question. Father Michael asks, why can't people recognize that life in the womb is worthy of protection? That's a good question. I think there's something to trying to see the other side when there is a lot of a force sort of against the culture of life that the Catholic Church is trying to promote. Why can't they see it?
I think for many people on the other side, and particularly women, but part of it is that we have the educational institutions, and sadly even Catholic educational institutions, that would prefer not to talk about the church teaching and in fact side with the other side. But I think it's because they actually believe that abortion is a necessary yet tragic choice. It's a necessary evil. There are a number of prominent pro-choice commentators who have acknowledged, yes, it is a human being. Yes, it is not going to be a puppy when it emerges. It's not going to be an oak tree. It's not going to be any of these things. It is going to be a human being. But it is too burdensome to ask women to continue the pregnancy given some of the circumstances that pregnant women find themselves in. And I think it's a false sympathy. Not false in the sense of you're deluding yourself, but in the sense that the immediacy of the need of the woman in need, the woman who's poverty stricken, the woman whose husband has just left her, the woman in an abusive relationship, that need is so apparent to them that they can't see past it. The woman who's been raped, to see that the actual joy and healing that can come from having brought into the world this very special and unique human being. And then I think part of them see the tragic circumstances that certain children are raised in. And it's, again, I would say it's a sympathy for what is right in front of them without recognizing what they're not seeing.
Right. I think that God is answering our prayers about the culture of life. I think that we do need to have hope. And I think you would agree that politics, right? I don't know who it was who said it, but politics sort of flow from culture. And I tend to think that all these prayers that the church and has been offering up to God to help us create a culture of life, God is trying to help answer these, trying to answer these prayers.
So too.
Yeah, and even it kind of circles back to what we were talking about with Amy Barrett, that it is a false idea that, as we said earlier, that I'm not going to recognize this child in my womb as a person or as having value, because if I don't, I won't be successful. I mean, she is case in point proof against that. And you're seeing sort of more of this. And so I'm grateful to God for that. That's what that makes me think of when you say these things. So grateful to you. Thank you for coming on with us.
It's been a delight.
It's a real joy to have you, Professor Collett. I want to let everyone know that we have, if you enjoyed the Upper Room with us, we have a sign-up link that should be below or somewhere in the comments. Just please click on that and you can hear about our future shows. Again, Professor Collett, so grateful to have you. May God bless you. And actually, why don't we end in prayer? We'll offer.
I like it.
We'll offer all these this conversation through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary as we pray. Hail Mary, full of grace. The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary,
Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.
Amen.
In the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Super fun.
Professor.
Thanks so much.
What a joy. Take care.